Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to have an hour of poetry. Now, if we were actually in the Arden Wood Auditorium, I could have you confined because we had been instructed that the ushers were to be guards and they were going to lock the doors so that the moment you heard we were talking poetry, you would be locked in and you couldn't get out. But I realized that now you can get out because you're sitting there in front of your computer. But I'm asking you not to. Give me a little time to show you what poetry means to you as a Christian Zionist. And I know the first response could be, well, some will say, I love poetry. And the other would say, I have no use for it whatsoever. I've never memorized a poem. I've never even looked at a poem. And I certainly don't want to hear a poem. But I'm hoping within the next hour, I could maybe change your mind about that. It isn't just the boy stood on the burning deck eating peanuts by the peck. See, there's more to it than that. I would like to begin by asking you to do me just one favor. Would you think about some problem that you'd like to see healed? Something in your life. It could be a physical problem, a family situation, a financial situation, and think, is it possible that within the confines of this hour, I could hear something that could be of help to me? And it just could be, in poetry. I do want to dedicate this hour to our first responders, not to necessarily the firemen, the policemen. They're wonderful people and they're incredible. The ambulance drivers, they're wonderful, but they're getting a lot of kudos right now. Our first responders are just a little different. They are our Christian Science nurses, the unheralded people we call on in a moment of need. And we don't think about them too much until we have that moment of need. So the first poem I'm going to share with you is dedicated to them, a tribute to Christian Science nursing, just excerpts from it. It's a poem written by Jan Keeler. And by the way, you're going to be getting the reference to each of these poems, if you want them, in your heart-to-heart message that comes later from Arden Wood. Each of them, I'd say 9/10 of them, are from the Christian Science journals and sentinels. Some haven't been published by the publishing house, but they're all Christian Science. The first one begins, she was there for me. In a dark moment, perhaps one of my darkest, she was there for me. She, at a crazy hour, left her home to stand by my side. Like John the Baptist, she was there, expectant, full of praise and ready to usher in the healing activity of the Christ. She was motherhood with its most gentle, tender touch. She was fatherhood in strength and confidence. She was joy. She fed us meals. She fed me truths of God persistently, though trying not to be. I was so scared. She was unimpressed. She was undaunted by the antics of mortal mind that had put me in such a mess. She had seen divine love overcome much more than this. I was not at my best, yet no personal opinions or judgments slung recklessly from her lips, straight from our leader's revelation of care. She was there. Together we witnessed God's healing presence. Could have been a he, but this time it was a she, this Christian Science nurse, a concept I had supported for others' care. But this time, oh, thank you, Father, she was there for me. Never so important, by the way, as when they're there for you. Poetry says things in a different way. That's why we enjoy poetry. You see, we can say things in prose when we do, but when you say them in poetry, they take on a bit of a different meaning, a more emotional meaning, possibly a deeper meaning. And that's why in a moment of strife, a problem, you go to poetry. You're saying, no, I don't. I don't go to poetry. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. If you were raised in Christian Science, as I was, or if you've raised children in Christian Science, you raised them in poetry. No, I did. Yes, you did. Remember? Father, Mother, God, loving me, guard me when I sleep, guide my little feet up to thee. It's poetry. Or maybe as you became a teenager, you got in some kind of a problem and it looked like things were happening that changed your life, that were bothersome to you, and you might have gone to, in heavenly love abiding, no change my heart shall fear. And safe is such confiding, for nothing changes here. A poem. You say, no, that's not a poem. That was hymn number 148. All of the hymns are poems. So when you go to, oh, gentle presence, peace and joy and power, oh, life divine that owns each waiting hour, you just went to a poem, my friend. Or you might say, well, maybe so, but what? What else might you have gone to? Where a lot of us go, the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That's not a poem, that's a psalm, that's a poem. The Psalms are poems too. So you've been going to poetry all along. But some of the poetry we're going to share now might be unique to you. You might have heard some of these in other talks, but let's share them. For instance, if we were to understand that poetry could bring us help in healing, where might we go? May I give you a sample? We were members at one time of the Christian Science Church in Golden, Colorado. One evening, I gave a testimony, and in the testimony, I repeated a couple of words from a poem. The words were, which of these men do you think of as you? Genesis 1 or Genesis 2? A couple of weeks later, a gentleman got up. He was seated in front of me. I think he probably didn't know that I was in the audience. And he said, 2 weeks ago, I was in this church, and I heard one of the goofiest testimonies I think I've ever heard. A lady got up and said some banal little 2-line ditty, and I thought that is so shallow. It lacks depth. Poetry lacks no depth. He said, during the interim, in these 2 weeks, I went on a business trip to Atlanta, Georgia, and I was sound asleep in our motel room with my wife when in the middle of the night, I suffered a massive heart attack. I'm not naive, he said. I understood what was happening. I was completely paralyzed, including my vocal cords. I could not speak. I could not move. I could not nudge my wife to tell her I needed help. I could not say help. I was totally, for the first time in my life, helpless. What am I going to do? He said, I tried to think of something from the Bible, something from science and health, and my mind went blank. In my terror, I couldn't think of prose. And all of a sudden, I thought, that goofy testimony. Which of these men do you think of as you? Genesis 1 or Genesis 2? And I saw the implication there, that if I was Genesis 1, I was going to make it through the night because I was God's image and likeness. But if I was Genesis 2, I didn't have but a few more minutes to live. And I focused on Genesis 1, and it broke that mesmeric fear, and I was healed. I've always loved that poem. It was written decades ago by a man named J. Woodruff Smith, who was a Christian Science practitioner. And the poem I'd like to share with you. Where did it begin, this concept called you? Genesis 1 or Genesis 2? If you know what's what, do you know who's who? In Genesis 1, in the 26th verse, there's a man with never a taint of a curse. But in Genesis 2, verse number 7, there's a dust man conceived. He'll never see heaven. So it all boils down to which one you claim. What thou seest, thou beest. So what is your name? If you're Genesis 1, then you know what you're worth. For according to law, you'll inherit the earth. But if you're just a mortal and made out of dust, is there anything to you that's worthy of trust? No. The thing they call man in Genesis 2 is the dream of the dreamer. It never was you. So know who you are. Take your place in the sun. You're the immortal man of Genesis 1. But maybe you're not dealing with a physical problem right now. Maybe it's one involving business. I was giving a talk to a Discovery Bound group of teenagers. I think it was in Detroit some years ago. There were a couple of hundred kids there, and their parents were not supposed to be there because we were going to have a Q&A, and of course you don't want your parents in on that. So the parents were outside, but I knew that they, like all of us good parents, were spying on the entire thing. So I knew that they were listening. And that came out the next day. I talked on Saturday, gave some poetry, and on Sunday, I got a phone call from a businessman. I was still in the hotel, and he said, I have to tell you something about the poem you gave. It changed my life. I'm going to now give you the poem and then tell you, as Paul Carpenter would say, the rest of the story. The poem was written by Jacqueline Shaw back in 1936, by the way, and it was in the Sentinel at that time. And it's called Conversation at Nazareth. What love is? Well, that's a hard thing to say. To be a proper craftsman, that's love. You know, there was a carpenter once down the village. Oh, he was good. He was right quick at it. I'd hear his plane and his hammer go all day, and then at night he'd come and he'd sit and talk as free as any of us here. He used to talk about love. He held that love was something different from the common thought. He said that love meant perfection. All one did or said or thought. It should be perfect. That's a hard saying. What became of him? Oh, I don't know. I was away myself for around 10 years, but I heard he went as far away as Jerusalem. Perfection. Wow. In my thought, no one could be perfect. But he said, we all could be if we loved God hard enough and loved our fellow man. But I'd say to him, oh, could you love a mean man or a thief? He'd say, oh, yes, oh, yes. Just keep loving on. They'll come. They'll come. And then he'd get up and stride, kind of quiet in all his movements, down the street. I think he used to meet his mother there. And now for the story. The man had been owed a great deal of money by someone who had taken his food products and used them in his restaurant. The Christian Scientist was a man who warehoused huge amounts of food for the restaurants in that area. This particular man had owed him thousands and thousands of dollars for a long time. He had tried legally to pursue him, but nothing was of any avail. And so he had this huge debt. When that Sunday morning, after the Saturday talk, his phone rang while he was eating breakfast, and this man said, this is humiliating to me, and I know you're going to hang up, but I'm in desperate situations here. I can't open my restaurants. It's a big day. I have no food. Could you possibly provide me with food from your warehouse? He said his first reaction was, this is ridiculous. And then he thought about a line from the poem. If you just keep loving on, they'll thieve no more. They'll lie no more. Just keep loving. And I couldn't do anything but say, take the keys, go to the warehouse, get what you need. And he did. He came back, drove up the driveway with a huge truck filled with food. And there had been a man at the warehouse to greet him who was itemizing all the food he'd taken. And he said, I can't tell you how much this means to me. It's life and death to me in my restaurant. He said, but here's what I owe you. He's just added it up. So here's what I took, many thousands of dollars for that day's baggage. And he said, let me write a check, but let me also write a check for everything I have owed you from the past. Do you happen to know what it is? He said, yes, I happen to know what it is. And he said he paid me in full for all those years. There'll come a time they'll thieve no more, lie no more. If you just keep loving on, they'll come. Does that fit into any business problem you might have? Let's see. Well, then there's another problem that poetry speaks to that, frankly, is a problem, something on the mind of everyone in this audience, no matter who you are. Whether you're a troublesome two, or a skateboarder teen, or a millennial, or you're in your high time, or you're a senior citizen, or a senior citizen, this concept of age kind of haunts us. Something coming, something looming out there that's going to take me out, okay? With that thought in mind, I wrote a poem for the Sentinel called Happy Unbirthday. Before I give it, I'd like to share a story. We had a testimony the other night. A man, a senior citizen, said that he had been suffering for years with a problem in his left knee. And he had approached it from all kinds of angles, but he called his practitioner. He was very excited. He said, I got it. I finally got it. I know what I need to handle with that left knee. She said, what? He said, age. She said, really? How old is your right knee? So, that sometimes trips us up. At any rate, happy unbirthday. This is one I wrote, and it's from the Sentinel. I'm to record my birth date on line 3. Okay. But I'll not record it in my consciousness. I refuse to be trapped into some birth, maturity, decay syndrome, an adolescent senile cycle with a brief space in the middle to hurry up and be prosperous. No way. I am who I am, not approaching, not retiring, there, now, always. I also love a story about a Christian Scientist who was trying to cash a check. The cashier wanted to see his driver's license. So he handed it to her. She took a look at it and she said, How old are you? He said, I don't know. I've never considered it any of my business. Don't you either, okay? I was reading the story of David and Goliath once, and I thought, boy, Goliath, there's that monster. There's that big thing coming up here that's going to take us out, huh? Going to rob us of our good? And then I thought about David, a youth who conquered Goliath. So I also thought about Goliath being described as having 6 cubits in a span, pretty big guy. Well, I named this poem, which was for the journal, Your Lifespan. The passage of time, it seems such a Goliath. It tells me that life is a downhill trip, that at a given point, your strength, your companionship, your resources just begin to wane. The realization of eternity, it's like a David. It tells me that life is an uphill trip, that as we journey from sense to soul, our strength, our resources, our joy grow with us. But that time theory, it has such clout behind it. Medical research, universal belief, the media, the eternity premise has only the word of God behind it. It seems as helpless as a slingshot against a spear, a David against a Goliath. Funny thing about this one, though, the end is already written. The eternity of good, like David, will win. The Goliath of life in fading matter will fail. Don't let those 6 cubits scare you, much less the span. Those of you in Christian Science are well acquainted with one of our early workers, Paul Stark Seeley. One of his students told me an interesting story. Now, Seeley was at this point a senior citizen. His office, as I understand it, was on the 14th floor of his building. It was well known that there was an elevator in the building. He just didn't take it. He took the steps. So one of his young students had made an appointment, and he looked at the elevator and he looked at the steps and he thought, hey, if Seeley can do this, so can I. So he went up the 14 steps And when he opened the office door, he collapsed on the floor. He was so doggedly tired. And it was embarrassing. Mr. Seeley had done it. This young man couldn't do it. Mr. Seeley, in his infinite kindness, came over and said, son, please don't be embarrassed. I couldn't do that when I was your age either. Okay. Now let's talk about another kind of a problem that some of us face from time to time. And that might involve a member of the family. Some of you are parents, some of you are grandparents, aunts, uncles. We all have concerns from time to time with children. And I've always loved this one, written by Holly Suhi for the journal. It's called Only a Lamb. In a dream that seemed so real, I heard my child calling out to me. Frantic and with all my strength, I rushed to the scene, finding him already beyond my reach. My heart cried out to my God and his. It was then I woke to hear Christ speak. God, love, is like a shepherd who carries his lambs in his arms all the day long and all the night long, who never lets one down and never puts one down. My dear lamb, God said to me, I never asked you to be the shepherd. Both lambs were saved. And then from time to time, we have a millennial who may have left home, may have left Christian Science, who knows? A kid who's just gone off the charts, like the prodigal. This poem was written about the prodigal in the words of the prodigal. It was written by Godfrey John. After all this time, it won't be easy going home. I'd left him guiltily back then. He'd given me everything I'd asked without a word. He'd sent no one to check up on my life. And in no time, I'd gone through the legacy. Well, sure, it's tough now making ends meet. I'd be better off emptying the slops in the old house. So I'm heading back. Oh, it's so heavy going. That last 100 yards, I tell myself, what pride have I got to lose? Uh-oh, somebody's coming toward me through the sun. What if it's him? He's trying to head me off. You see, I sent no news. No one knew I was coming. I stand still, worthless, steeled to meet the shame, the accusing finger, the condemning voice. The sun is in my eyes. I'm blinded. I hear my name. What is this? I'm in my Father's arms. He holds me close. Oh, there must be some mistake. His tears mixed with mine like warm rain. He's calling everyone to celebrate. Why? I still don't understand. I grope for light, and now suddenly my mind swims with his vision. Deep beneath the mess of what I was, I learn his sight. I'm seeing what he sees, something bright, untouched by hurt, unblemished in the sun. Something I thought had no right to exist is growing through the rubble of the wrong, chosen, cherished, insuppressible, something morning clean, unsung. Beneath every immoral life, a lily inches up toward the sun. And then there are sometimes family members who left Christian Science, maybe left home, and on their own terms happily came back. And this has been epitomized by John Cuno in a journal poem. It reminds me a bit of, we have 3 children, and they all have stayed in Christian Science. I asked them why. And this poem rather reminds me of the answer our son gave, Marshall. I said, why did you stay in Christian Science? He said, Mother, Where else would I go? This is called the textbook. I keep going back to it. The road home. Like a map to some forgotten place lived in a long time ago. I'd get lost otherwise. There are no signs on other streets, no directions, not a clue anywhere. The 3As can't tell me where that town is. No travel agent can. People aren't much help. They say, home? Heaven? I wouldn't know. I just live down the street. Perfection? Oh, I don't know anything about that. Well, I'm going back there now. I'm on the road. And I've got my little book with the gold-tipped pages tucked away in my backpack. I can't be without it. Each day I get it out and lose myself on that road in order to find myself, the true self that knows only the real. The little book explains words like when the morning stars first sang together and what is truth. And I have to find that town and that choir and get back in there and start singing again, singing the truth. The road brightens, the way becomes clear, trees clap their hands, birds praise God with their beaks and wings, and a voice says, that's right, kid. Just keep going straight ahead. Don't turn to the left, don't turn to the right. I'll tell you when. And it does. And suddenly, I know I'm there right now. Just seeing everything the way it really is. Just knowing that home is the road. And I'm there, singing. All three of our children, as they were growing up, would have a bedtime ritual where we would go into their room and ask for a good thought right before they went to sleep. Well, the littlest one is Heidi. And Heidi was preschool when I went into her room one night and I said, Heidi, can I hear your thought? And she said, I don't have one. Knowing that was a crime punishable by death, she soon called me back to her room and said, I have it. I have the thought. I said, great. What is it? She said, I pray, and the darkness goes away. Oh, I said, I love that. I love it. Because you said, I pray, and I pray. You didn't say, I hope. I pray, and the darkness goes away. I said, Heidi, it's always darkness. It's always simply the absence of light. And it's going to take on all kinds of scary names as you grow up, different names. Can you just remember, it will never be more than darkness, the absence of light. We said goodnight. I went to the door, and she said, Mother. I thought now she's going to say, I love you. No, she said, if it's that good, why don't you send it to the Sentinel? I said, okay, I'll do that. She started to turn off, Mother. If they print it, split the check. Oh, my word. These children, they learn so early, don't they? Anyway, this was in the days when the Sentinel paid $25 for a poem. So I will confess, we did split the check, $12.50 a piece. And it came out in the Sentinel as on expectancy. I pray, and the darkness goes away, said my child. That's a childlike thought. But it says a lot about prayer, about hope, about expectancy. Tell me something. When you pray, do you know the darkness will go away? One night in our church in Laguna Beach, we had a stranger come in, a lady visiting, and she opened her testimony by saying, as the saying goes, I pray, and the darkness goes away. I thought, oh my word, it is now a saying. That is so exciting. And I will add a little tidbit to it because during our recent situations here that all of us are in, and it's why I'm not sitting there with you in Arden Wood, their children, Heidi's 3 little boys, are now helping to clean the house. And one of them, as they were working along, trying to relieve himself of the task, said, Mother, whatever happened to I pray, and the dirt just goes away? She said, I think you need to reread the poem. That's not exactly what it said. I do believe that healing is very much predicated by expectancy. It seems to me that those who enter into a situation, a problem situation, with that absolute expectancy of God taking care of them are the ones who more quickly get out. I once had an audience in LA, a big audience, and I asked them to do what I asked you to do, the first of this. I said, why don't you all think of a problem you'd like to have healed? Because I said, I happen to have brought my guru along to help me out with this, and he's going to give you some help. And of course, there was a gasp when the word guru came out. There was a bit of a gasp, even in Los Angeles. So I said, I'll give you a minute. Codify that need. What is it? And then I said, would you please come out? So from the side of the church podium there, where the readers come out, came my guru, who was, again, one of the grandchildren, who was 3 years old at the time. But he always came out with gems, and I really wanted him to simply say what came to him. So I put him up on a cardboard or card table, that's what I'm trying to say, right beside the reader's desk. And his name is Tafton. He'll be really embarrassed by this because he's in high school now. But at any rate, I said, Tafton, you see this audience out here? Everyone here has a problem, and they're all different, and no one's telling us what it is. Will you tell them something that will help them? So without giggling, I watched what he did. He took in that audience from left to right. He panned that audience all the way around, leaned into the microphone and said, God will take care of it, and ran off to play in the nursery. And he will. Sometimes the suggestion comes in healing, I didn't get hold of this soon enough. It got too big. It got away from me, and now I can't heal it. We have the story, of course, all of us know about the Bible. It begins in Genesis with the little serpent, and then it culminates here in Revelation with the great red dragon. And there's an old cliche about why didn't they get it when it was little? Well, if we didn't get it when it was little, is it too late? I wrote this one for the book Ideas on Wings. It was also in the Sentinel. It's called Dragons for Unreal. That serpent was so little, I hardly noticed it. Now it's a virtual dragon. So, dragons aren't real. Only easier to see than serpents. Easier to see through. Ready for destruction. Not my destruction. It's. Sometimes in healing, we're concerned too much with the problem. The logistics. Should I Google it? I wonder who else has that. I wonder how I got this. I wonder. And we're spinning around with this instead of spinning around with the truth. We get enmeshed in the lie. So I wrote about that in a poem called Gone Fishing, which was in the journal. I'd gone fishing for healing. Took great bait along, armed myself with books and references, and threw out the nets. Nothing. Then I wondered what I was fishing for. An explanation of the problem? How did it attack? What was its name? When would it go? Where was it located? Not a nibble. So I cast my net on the other side. Instead of fishing around for what was wrong and why, I cast on the side of truth and what was right and why. And guess what? We're having fish for dinner. Okay. I teach Sunday school. I teach the middle school youngsters. And one day I bought a box of seed over at Home Depot, and I took it to Sunday school and I read them the parable of the sower and the seed. And then we took the seed outside to experiment. We took some of those seeds and we buried it very carefully in the soil and took good care of it. And then we threw some of it on top of rocks, threw some of it to the wind. The birds were getting it. And then we went back inside I just wanted to have them freshly cemented the story that Jesus had given us about the sower and the seed. And I said, now, what have we learned? And one of my little boys said, I'm worried about the seeds left in the box. I realized I hadn't planted them all. And that brought me to another revelation about healing our churches. We concern ourselves with dwindling members and all of that. And we're having a lecture, but I dare not invite them. I mean, they wouldn't want to come there. And that person, my neighbor has a problem, but I could not possibly give her science and health. It would. I call this one untapped potential. There is seed that falls on fallow ground. There's seed that lands on the rocks. But the seed that bothers me most of all is the seed that's just left in the box. Got it? Got it? If not, I got another one for you, which says, in essence, the same thing. But it was written, in another generation, 1912, October 1912, the journal, by one of our very famous poetesses, Louise Knight Wheatley Cook. It's called A Better Way. A woman was given a candle, and she put it away on a shelf. It's all I have, she murmured, and hardly enough for myself. I must not let anyone see it, but all through the coming night, I'll know that it's ready and waiting in case I should need the light. She stole through her empty chambers to her own little cheerless room. How dark it has grown, she murmured as she groped her way through the gloom. I wish I could light my candle. But she tried to be only glad she had put it away so safely because it was all she had. Another was given a candle, and she stepped out into the night. It's all I have, she murmured. I must make the most of its light. There are hearts that are breaking somewhere. There are lives that are sad and drear. I must hurry along with my candle and let them know that it's here. O'er valley and hill she wandered with her one little flickering flame, and it brightened many a doorway that was dark until she came. It crept into desolate places, it banished disease and sin, and hands outstretched were waiting to welcome the stranger in. Two women met in the morning as the eastern skies grew red. One came from her happy journey. One came from her sleepless bed. Each held in her hand a candle, but the eyes of one were sad. I just couldn't light it, my sister. It was all I had. The other one made no answer, but her face in the sunrise glow looked like the face of an angel, and she only whispered low, "Oh, love divine, I thank thee," for she saw now the night was done. She had lighted 1,000 candles from her poor little flickering one. Keep sharing. I also wanted to, I told you that prose is one thing, poetry another. I think most of you are Bible scholars, and you have read the story of the incident at Nain, Nain, the widow woman who's lost her only son now, and he's being carried away in a casket to be buried. And we know that much of the story, and Jesus comes along and raises him. And that's the story. But in poetry, it reads a little differently. And this was written by Bernice Waymeyer from the standpoint of a pallbearer, the young man's best friend. I was a pallbearer that yellowed afternoon. The weight of my dearest friend was an ache in my whole body. Grief ran deep. He was so young. The waves of rampant wailing bore his mother on, and she a widow. The double loss seemed doubled in the crying. We were core, that pulsing throng, struggling through narrow streets, dust rising, drying throats, clotting tears. Then, at the city's gate, we met a man. A man I can't forget. How could I? His radiant presence blocked the crowd, stopped the crying, stopped the crush of passionate grief. In that sudden stillness, the hen called to her chicks. We heard the rustle of her wings. The sun pushed down till all the The silent spaces were filled with heat. The man stepped forward and touched the casket. He held us steady in his gaze. What did I feel? A love so bright it seemed a presence. A power so overwhelming we were struck in awe. A joy so winning. Where had the sadness gone? To the mother, weep not, was all he said. Bold words. Then, turning to my poor friend, wrapped for the burial, young man, I say unto thee, arise. The man stepped forward, touched the casket. The crowd gasped and fell in fear because he sat up. He spoke to us. He spoke to us as though there were no time lost in dying. He embraced his mother, soothed and supported her. We looked then and saw the Christ. This was not yellow sun, but light, so white, so clear. We saw ourselves mirrored in that purity, found our own radiance, unmarred, joyous, reflecting light in light. We saw the truth of life, and we sang praises, not to this man, but to a God so good that all the shadows fell away. Sometimes we wonder in healing why we aren't having maybe the healing someone else did. What are we doing here? Why aren't we walking on the water? Well, maybe we haven't gotten out of the boat yet. This poem was by Richard Howard, and it's called Radical Steps. It's also in Ideas on Wings. It's about Peter. You can call him what you like. Impetuous, brash, outspoken, but once he recognized the Christ and heard that command, he did what the others didn't. He stepped out onto the water and walked. He didn't wonder. He didn't worry. He didn't wait. He didn't even look to see if the others were behind him. He just climbed out and walked. Oh, I know. I know what you're going to say. That on Peter's part, the story is really a failure because he floundered, but friend, because he had his vision fastened on the Christ. That Christ caught him, reached through shrieking wind and waves to uplift him beyond sinking doubt and floundering fear. That Christly rebuke was not because he had dared to trust, but because he had not trusted even more. Oh no, my friend, that short trip was a triumph. And now, sailor, what about us? When the going gets rough and the waves pile up and the wind is contrary and the command is come, what shall we do? Remain troubled and huddled and crying out? Or take those radical steps? Again, you want to walk on the water? You get out of the boat. This one is one that has been unpublished by me. And if any of you are discouraged because some of your poetry or prose has been rejected, I could wallpaper a house with my rejections. So you are now going to hear one that you won't read. And I've never quite decided what the title of it would be, but it could be, what it is, it could be Wilt Thou Be Made Whole, because it's the story of the man at the pool at Bethesda. You know the story. He's been there 38 years. He's waiting for the angels to move the water, and Jesus comes up and asks him a couple of questions. He asks him, are you, rise, take up the bed and walk, and wilt thou be made whole? And here's what I wrote. From the standpoint of the man at the pool. Why did he ask me if I'd like to be made whole? Is it possible that this man called Jesus could actually make me whole again? Oh, that would be beyond my fondest dreams, but come on, take up my bed If I could take up the bed, I'd have done it 38 years ago. I can't even lift myself, let alone my bed. You just don't get it, do you, Jesus? I always miss the angels. My timing is off. Someone always gets there first. I mean, others are quicker than I am, quicker to learn, to know. I'm just destined to stay here for life. Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. That's what he told me. He was so sure. Evidently, he knew I could. He made me believe I could. His trust in healing became mine. His trust in God became mine, and I did it. I thought I was unworthy of healing. He didn't. I rose, I took up my bed, I walked. It took him seeing me for me to see me. The man of God's creating, the man I had always been. As I record this, it's not on May 3rd. You're watching it then, but I'm doing this actually over the Easter weekend in a recording studio in Southern California, much as you think I'm there at the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay. We're having a pandemic of fear, of course, across the world, as you're well aware. And this weekend, it's focused on the fact that our churches are empty. No one can go inside the buildings. The churches are empty. Now, the people I think who worry about this the most are those who really go to church religiously, meaning Easter and Christmas. That's about it. Most of us go every Sunday, and we've already made online provisions to be a part of our church. So an empty building doesn't concern us. What's important to us at Easter is something else that is empty. The tomb. Got it? Okay, speaking of Easter, crucifixion, resurrection, this is another one that is unpublished, okay? But I've thought a lot about Peter, who was so excited about following Jesus. No matter where he was sent, he would always be loyal, and Jesus knew very well he was going to betray him, remember, before the cock crew thrice. He would betray him thrice before the cock crew. You know the story. But I got a little interested in that, so I wrote this poem. And when I quote the Bible, I'm going to quote with quotation marks so you'll understand what I'm doing, okay? I call this one Deja Vu, all over again. When Jesus was being led into the palace of the high priest, quote, Peter stood at the door without, John 18, and outside where the soldiers and servants made a fire, quote, Simon Peter stood with them and warmed himself, unquote, John 18. And when a damsel asked if he were one of the disciples, quote, he saith, I am not, John 18. And when asked if Peter had been in the garden with Jesus, quote, Peter denied again, and immediately the cock crew, John 18. And you, when what you believe is challenged, what will you do? Hear those angel voices or a distant cock-a-doodle-doo? Another Bible story that we could take note of in healing that I've turned into a poem called Trial and Triumph involved the story when Moses was trying so hard to prove to the children of Israel that he could do what he was commissioned to do, even to prove it to himself. And there was that little incident with his rod. He was a shepherd, he had a rod, and it became a serpent and people were fleeing from it. But when Moses came back and handled it, it became a rod again. Sometimes we don't handle things at their most dangerous places. We kind of avoid it. You know, think about this for just a minute. Moses picked up that serpent by its tail. He was smart. He was a desert man. He knew more than that. You don't pick up a deadly serpent by its tail because it can whip right around and bite you. He picked it up and handled it at its most dangerous point. And I wrote this one for the Sentinel. What's the difference between a serpent and a rod? Isn't it all in the handling it? Fear it, flee from it, and you've got a serpent. Take it by the tail, handle it, and you've got a rod. Sometimes we give a bit of an excuse when we have a healing project to do, and we tell ourselves, oh, I'll try. Mrs. Eddy was pretty adamant about that. One of her household workers told of a story when Mrs. Eddy had given her a task to do, and she said, I'll try. And Mrs. Eddy said, never say, I will try. It leaves a loophole for error to get in. Say, I will. That shuts the door on error. And on the premise of that, I wrote this for the Sentinel. How the world would have drastically changed if Jesus had just tried to heal, or if he just said to try to believe. How would that make you feel? What would have occurred at the sheep market pool had he said, try to pick up your bed? Or if he had just tried to feed that crowd, would they have all been fed? Did Jesus ask us to try to know the truth that would make us free? Did he ask us to try to leave our nets, to try to follow me? Love doesn't try to meet our needs. As love, it simply does. Always has, always there, always was, always will. The thought that is presented in that, which is, you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free, I quoted that, always puzzled me when I was a kid. Because I thought of all the cajillion truths in the Bible and in our textbook, what's the silver bullet? What's this one thing I'm supposed to know, Jesus, that makes me free? What is the truth? And I finally figured it out, I think, for myself anyway, that the truth that makes us free is the truth that we're free already. And I wrote this for the journal rather recently. The best way to get out of the woods is to see that you've never been in them. It's knowing without a shadow of doubt that you have always been the perfect man all along. Was that what Jesus was trying to tell us when he said, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free? Was the truth we were to know the truth that we were free already? That we had never lost our true identity as God's own image and likeness? That we didn't need to now climb out of somewhere we had never been? Along that line, about the idea of Genesis 1, which we started with, and then the truth that makes us free, the truth we're free already, it all is sort of encompassed in one huge thing, which is the absolute allness of God. I was so impressed by that, by an incident that occurred in our church a few weeks ago when a stranger came in, a young man. When the testimony meeting began, he got up and spoke. It was clear he was new to Christian Science. He was a visitor. And what he said, I believe, made us all think rather profoundly about the allness of God. That's so instrumental in healing. I called the poem from the Sentinel now, What If? He was a stranger to our church, a stranger to Christian Science. But he'd stopped at our reading room and read, and read, and read. And then came to church, and quietly, he took the usher's microphone to ask a question. In a virtual whisper, he said, what if? What if God really is all? That God is right here, right now, always and ever, that God is at my right hand, my left hand, above me, below me. I mean, what if that really is true? Could I ever be afraid again if that were the case? Could I ever move on or out or away from God? I mean, well then, what is there left to fear? If God is all, if God really is all," he quietly whispered and sat down. And I think he got us all thinking about that. There was a testimony in the periodicals a few months ago about a woman in Paris who had not heard of Christian Science, wanted to know more about it. She was in need, and so she called on the practitioner, went to his office. And understanding that she knew nothing about it, he really focused on trying to help her with the concept that God is actually all, that God is everywhere, everywhere. And she said, "I'm sorry, I just don't get it." He said, "Really? You remind me of a little fish out in the ocean who says, 'Where's the water?'" Okay, anyway. This next poem was written by Nancy Lavender Bryan, and it comes from the journal, and it's called "After the Healing." And I've got to preface it with just a bit of a personal story here. Probably many of you already know that our house in Laguna Beach was saved in a very dramatic fire that took place, and it took 418 houses out, and our house was in the center of the fire, and it was untouched, thanks to the prayers of Christian Scientists around the world, which was acknowledged, by the way, in the newspaper, that it was the prayers of Christian Scientists that saved the house. When we left the house, we were confident that it was gone. It couldn't have been. The flames were totally surrounding it. And so my son called from the monitor office where he was working, and he said, "I see on the news that your house burned. It had already been reported. It was in the newspaper." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Have you lost everything?" I said, "Everything, but we're all right." He said, "Are you okay with having lost these things?" I said, "Yes, I'm okay." He said, "Mom, what about the things you can't replace? Scrapbooks, photographs?" I said, "I have my memories." He said later, "When you told me that, I thought that house couldn't burn." "After the Healing" is the name of the poem. When you come forth from the fiery furnace, hair unsinged, coat unchanged, no smell of fire, hid with Christ in God forever, you were never in the fire. I'd like to close, and you thought I never would, didn't you? I'd like to close with an incident that you're all very, very familiar with. And although Easter has passed now for you, it's still in the dim distance, isn't it? It's my favorite poem of all poems, written by Jacqueline Shaw. It's called "The Morning Meal." And we're going to set the stage for just a minute here. As far as the disciples are concerned, Jesus is gone. There have been appearances, the road to Damascus, but no one is quite sure. Is he here? Is he going to leave? He's not a daily presence with them anymore. What's going on here? So they go back to their comfort zone. They go back to fishing. 7 of them. Been in a fishing boat all night, and they've caught nothing. Probably rather defeating for guys who now aren't healing and teaching and preaching, at least at the moment. At least they were going to fish, but they're not even successful there. When they see a man over on the shore, and he's got some bread and some fish, he's got a little fire going over there, he calls out and says, "Have you any meat?" And they say, "No." And he said, "Well, cast your net on the right side, and you shall find." The right side. I've thought about that. I don't know how wide their boat was. I don't know, 8 feet, 10 feet. If you have fished all night on the left side of the boat and you're told to fish now on the right side, what difference is it going to make? They did it. It interests me they didn't question that. I don't see anything in the Bible about that's not going to work. They did it because I'm wondering if maybe they surmised there was more to that question and more to this than they were surmising, okay? And then when immediately over 100 fish leapt into the nets, they knew something was different. And it had to be that man on the shore. It had to be him. It had to be him. And so they paddled in there as quickly as they could. I understand from some of the researchers that Peter actually jumped out of the boat to try to get in there faster if he could. We were at the Sea of Tiberias here. And this is a poem that was written in the words of the doubting Thomas, as they all now sat around that fire and listening for what might be the last time to the Master. He had just had a talk. He had a talk at this time, I will explain, about love. You'll see it referenced with Peter. And it was a time when he asked him 3 questions, the same questions. And I always used to wonder, what was the problem there? Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? And he said, yes. In biblical terms, of course, I love you. But Jesus turned right around and asked him again, do you love me? More than these? Yes, I love you. 3 times he asked him, do you love me? Yes, I love you. What Peter must have been wondering, what's going on? I don't know. But I have heard some scholars say that this was unraveled by the meaning of the word love in the original biblical language. There were 3 terms for it. One was eros. You can imagine what that is. Erotic, passionate, lustful love. That did not even come into the equation. The next one up is spelled Phileo. You can imagine that the word philanthropy must have come from that. These are the good people, really fine people, the Rotary Club, bringing baskets of goods to the poor, etc. Just nice people, good people. But the highest form is agape, that love for God that surpasses everything else. Jesus asked him, according to researchers, using the term agape. And he was answered with the term philo, the Phil one, meaning, do you love me? Do you love God? I like you very much. Didn't quite answer the question. So Jesus asked him again, do you agape love me? Philo, yes, I like you very much. 3rd time around, Jesus changed the verb form. Do you love me in the human sense, in the philanthropic sense? Yes, I do. Evidently, how do we surmise? How do we put ourselves in their place? But I have thought that possibly Peter at that point wasn't quite ready. He was later, but Jesus recognized that. So at any rate, you're going to see this poem refer to Jesus talking to Peter about love. The morning meal. The words of the doubting Thomas at the Sea of Tiberias. Yes, it was here. We pulled a boat up there, and then here he'd made the fire. Oh, it was just such a morning as this. I remember still his hands moving to and fro, giving us the fish and the bread and the waters lapping. They lapped against the side of the boat, just as you hear it now, kind of a lap, lap. We were tired after the night. I lay in the grass and ate and watched those hands. It might have been the same as before, but it wasn't. I tried to pretend it was. I tried to pretend it never happened. That dreadful night, those days when all seemed lost, it was like a dream. Only I knew it wasn't. And I knew too he would go. When the light got stronger, he would go. What? No. I wasn't drowsy. I was wide awake. It was so peaceful there. Heaven come down to earth. Yeah, that was it. I heard him and I seemed to hear everything else as if my thought touched his in some clear radiance. Does anyone understand what I'm trying to say? Look, a bird sang and a caterpillar crawled across the grass, and it was new and it was lovely. And still his voice went on. He was talking to Peter, talking about love. And I saw love. I saw what he meant. I saw that we were to become shepherds and fishermen too. I looked at him again once more into those well-remembered eyes. Oh, it was like sinking into a well of love. And I thought, I can do that. I can love. And all the hate and spite and bitter sense of weariness left. I didn't hate those Roman soldiers or Herod or Pilate because I saw that Christ was greater than them all. I knew I would never fear again. I would just love God. It was like a light from heaven. So clear, so bright. I had to close my eyes. And when I opened them again, he'd gone. Peter and John, they were standing by the fire. I never saw such a sad look before. But underneath, it was as if there was a mighty calm. And then Peter raised his head and spoke. Come on, gather up the catch. We have work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Lona. Thank you for giving us wonderful new views of poetry and healing. Especially today, these inspired views are much wanted and needed. And now let's close our meeting by making a commitment to work together to free ourselves and the world from the contagion of fear and gross materiality. In the words of our leader, Mary Baker Eddy, from Miscellaneous Writings, beloved children, the world has need of you, and more as children than as men and women. It needs your innocence, unselfishness, faithful affection, uncontaminated lives. Thank you all for joining us today. We're deeply grateful for your love and for your support. And we look forward to hearing from you and hopefully seeing you soon. Goodbye.